Something about animation too, where your drawings come to life. So it's a crazy thing because it doesn't really exist like if you looked at it frame by frame, but when it's moving, it's alive. It's
Hey folks, welcome back to Catamoment, hosted by me, Molly Stone, the Artistic Director at Catamoment Arts. Today's episode features my interview with Alan Jennings. Alan is an experimental animator, and he is a lecturer with the animation department at Mass Art. He also is this year's keynote speaker and guest artist for the 6th Annual Vermont Animation Fest. The Vermont Animation Festival is hosted by Northern Vermont University in partnership with Catamoment Arts and the Vermont Curators Group. This year, the entire event will be hosted virtually, all online. So if you go to vermontanimationfestival.org, you'll get all the information you need on how to sign up for the workshops, how to attend the keynote address, and how to see the film screenings. This year, we will be featuring Alan's work in our virtual gallery. So at catamountarts.org, you will find our virtual gallery, and we'll be featuring many of Alan's pieces in that, with support from the Vermont Curators Group. So Alan and I had a great discussion about his process and about how he was born and raised in Vermont and how his love of animation took him on a journey from Berlin, Vermont, out to Boston. So here's that interview with Alan. I am here with Alan Jennings, an experimental animator who is this year's featured artist at the 6th Annual Vermont Animation Festival hosted by Northern Vermont University in partnership with Catamoment Arts and the Vermont Curators Group. So Alan, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start off by talking a little bit about the Animation Festival. Like I said, it's the 6th annual, so this is something that is reoccurring. And this year, you are the keynote speaker. You will also be giving a talk and teaching a class, all virtually this year. And that is happening on March 26th and 27th. And before we even get started, I want people to know where to find information. And that information is at vermontanimationfestival.org. And if you can't handle that, you can just go to the Northern Vermont University website or head over to catamountarts.org, and you'll also find information there. So I wanted to start off, Alan, by asking you about your history in Vermont. So I have read that you were born, well, maybe not born, but raised in Berlin, so central Vermont. Just tell us a little bit about your history here in the Green Mountain State.
Yeah, that's right. I was born in Berlin and I grew up there. Yeah, I don't know. I was always interested in art when I was a kid, and I don't know, I pursued a lot of different things. I did a lot of cartoons when I was a little kid. Then I started getting into fine art a little bit in middle school. And I actually, when I first started around in high school, like the beginning of high school, I did a few animations, or I did a few on Super 8 film. And I actually did an independent study with a friend of mine from U32. That's where I went to high school. And we just used a old video camera, and we couldn't record single frames, so we just start and stopped it as fast as we could. And we made a few animations that way too. So that's kind of my background. That's how I got started.
Which is so charming, because nowadays watching my own children and experimenting with animation on their own, the technology is different, but the drive is literally the same. So that is so cool to hear about how you got started with just maybe taking pen to paper. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I made a first animation that was pencil on paper. And actually my dad built a camera stand for me to shoot that film. So I shot it, and the thing about film is you shoot it and you don't know what's going to happen. So I got it back and it was out of focus. It was a little out of focus.
Oh,
and
no.
It was like, oh man, because I couldn't reshoot it, like it was already exposed film. So I did actually reshoot it later. But I don't know, it was a nice first experiment anyway. But yeah. funny first experience for sure, working with film.
Yeah, and it's maybe in a retrospective of what we used to use back in the day. I don't think students these days will have to deal with that disappointment of waiting a week and getting something back and having it be a total failure. Uh, I, I'm guessing. I remember the throwaway cameras that we would have developed elsewhere. So yeah, you don't see your finished product right out in front of you. You have to wait. So talk to me about that. As you moved through high school and then decided on going to college and moving forward with your career, what kept you in this world of animation?
I did want to say one other thing about that last thing too. So I got the film back and it was out of focus, but it was also blown out. And at first I was thinking I couldn't really do anything with that footage because it was useless to me. But I realized that I could. So I shot something else and it was on 16 millimeter film. So Super 8 is really small and 16 is double that size. So I ended up actually drawing on the film directly. So I made an animation. So I have the animation that I tried to make, and then I have the drawn animation above it just with the Sharpie, because you could just use Sharpie on film and it'll stick. Um, so I don't know, just something to think about, since it still is the physical material, so I could still
Yep.
use it and then project it. Um, so why have I kept doing animation? um, there's something, I feel like each film is an opportunity to try something different. So I like to push myself with each project. So I started out making a lot of experimental films, especially when I was at MassArt, and I got into the experimental program at CalArts, but I had made so many experimental films that I wanted to really push what I could possibly do.
Mm-hmm.
So I my thesis film is a narrative film because it's something I hadn't ever done before. Because it's like, I don't know, I like the idea of a challenge and to make something better each time, or just take it in a different direction with each project. So there's something about animation too where your drawings come to life. So it's a crazy thing because it doesn't really exist like if you looked at it frame by frame, but when it's moving, it's
Right.
alive. It's a pretty amazing thing to see that happen.
Yeah, and so I want to go back to experimental animator. Tell me exactly what that means to you, or as best you can, because that's something that is really interesting to me, and it seems to open up or smash boundaries. So can you tell me a little bit more about what that means?
That's what the degree was.
Okay.
That's the only master's degree actually that you can get in animation from CalArts. I don't know if you had read this anywhere or anything, but there are two different programs. There's character animation and experimental. Character is so that you kind of make films that go into the industry, and experimental is kind of independent work, but they're both kind of independent related. Um, but experimental, I feel like it could be a lot of different things, experimenting with medium. Just drawing on film is something that maybe is more in that experimental category,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which I've done a lot of things with that, but just mixing mediums and trying things that are outside of conventions, I feel like that's kind of experimental. I had the person that did the sound design, the music for the Northeast Kingdom. I remember I was talking to him and he said that he was used to doing scoring for both character and experimental for the CalArts. And he said something like experimental students tried different things out, like they pushed it in a different direction. Like it was surprising the things that people in experimental did with narrative when they did a
Mm-hmm.
narrative. Because there's a lot of people that don't do narrative, and I love that kind of work too. I love all different types of filmmaking, but I don't know. It's just an interesting perspective because it's from a composer. It's not like from me. Just like
Right.
hearing about that experience, different process.
So did you know that you were doing experimental animation when you drew in Sharpie on that film?
I had gotten this book, the animation book by Kit Laybourne.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And it had all of these processes that you could try. So one of the other things I did when I first did an experiment with Super 8 was pixelation. So basically just animating yourself as a puppet. So that was one of the things in the book, but there was also drawing on film. That was one of the things that showed you how to do it and the materials that you could use to make that stuff. So discovering that book kind of opened up the possibilities for that.
Yep.
And there was another book that I had gotten in Montpelier when I was growing up that was on animation too. Um, just it was from the 90s, I don't know, but it had all of those different techniques in it too. Because I was always interested in that process too, like how something was made.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking of how things are made, tell us about your film, which I've watched several times now, called The Northeast Kingdom. There seems to be several layers of things happening there, not only in the narrative, but in the artistry. And so, talk to us about, because that's, I think, and that is part of our exhibit, is a lot of work or a lot of photos from that film. Tell us about that film, and first of all, because it's called The Northeast Kingdom, where did the inspiration come from for that particular film?
So I called it the Northeast Kingdom because it's a remote area where anything could kind of happen. So that's why I came up with that name. But I'm from Central Vermont, so I'm not even
Right.
from that region.
Yeah.
But a lot of those things from my childhood growing up in Vermont are in the film. So there's a character, a barber,
Mm-hmm.
who's based on a barber I had growing up, Francisco. Um, he's a Sicilian barber, and he raised sheep and made sweaters out of their wool. So that's just, he's like directly in the film, and that's actually what he looks like with the glasses, like the half glasses,
Yep.
like when he was cutting my hair. Um,
Did he have the sheep in his car though? I'm wondering.
I don't know if he had the sheep. Well, maybe at some point he had to move them. I don't know, but
You have to watch to see the sheep in the car.
mhm. um, yeah, and there are other elements in that too, like this the basically the establishing shot is kind of like downtown Northfield. If anyone has been there, there's a church on a hill, so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where that is from too. And there's a lot of different inspirations for that. Like I used blueberries because there were blueberries behind my house growing up, so that's kind of why I used those elements. And there's a character in the movie that grows the blueberries, the blueberry farmer person. That is based on an elderly woman that lived down the street from us. That originally in the movie it was more based on real life, but I kind of shifted it a little bit. But she used to raise and butcher turkeys for Thanksgiving. So, and she lived to be 102, and so I don't know, it was crazy. I can't even imagine like what she saw, growing up during that time, because I don't know, pretty amazing advances. But I don't know, just someone that I knew growing up down the street, and that's kind of what that character looks like
Mm-hmm.
in the movie. So I kind of drew on all of those initial inspirations and then try to shape it into a narrative. I think I'll say more about this because I'm going to be doing a talk for the
Yep.
festival too. But so I started out and I made all of the elements for the film. They were just on little pieces of paper, and I put all of the elements like little cutouts on a wall in California where I was living when I was making the movie, and so I could see all of the elements and see how I could connect the lives together, basically. So if I had everything in front of me, then I could see the connections more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that's kind of part of the process. That was like the very initial beginning of it. But there's a lot more, like that's just the initial start.
Yeah, and I know that you're going to talk. You're the keynote speaker for this year's Animation Fest, so you'll be going into that in way more detail. One thing I did want to ask about for folks who hopefully will be there but may not is that mystical creature that seemed to link everyone. You just have a couple words on where that came from.
The initial inspiration, so there's a naked deer man
Yep.
character that's in the movie. um, There was this guy in Northfield that would walk around and this is nothing. He just had a hat that had antlers on it. So that was like just the initial thing, just seeing that person walk around. I never found out who that person was in Northfield, but that was the initial inspiration. But it kind of shifted a little bit because I wanted to have this combination between a minister character and this mystical creature because that's kind of what's happening in the film. Like it's the way that each person treats spirituality. So, I don't know. I think it's all kind of in the film, and you can kind of see
Yeah.
how one person is taking advantage maybe of people, and the other is kind of just trying to help. But I mean, you could see that in the movie, the difference between the minister and the deer.
Yeah, and that's where what I was getting at with the layers. You have to watch that. I mean, it's 7 minutes long, maybe just a little bit over 7 minutes long, but it has so much content in it that there's so much symbolism, and like you said, like it depends on which perspective you're identifying with. And I am thrilled to hear that the the deer, the naked deer, was inspired by someone you never even met, just someone who was on the periphery of your life. And for me, I mean, there's so much juicy content in our everyday lives, and you are proving that. And I hope students that are in this work and folks who are just, being witness to it can see how complex it actually is. And I applaud you for it because it's such a fun film, Alan. It's really fun.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. So I want to shift just a little bit to your exhibit. So we are featuring, when I say we, Catamount Arts is featuring your works in a virtual exhibit. Like every other gallery out there, we are closed to the public still currently, which is why the Animation Fest is online. All the workshops are virtual as well. So, really they're open to anyone. And your keynote address will be open to everyone. And this exhibit will be open to everyone. So it is going to be at catamountarts.org, and it's also going to be featured and promoted by the Vermont Curators Group. So this exhibit will feature several of your works and will have links to your film. And so can you speak a little bit about how or which or why the images you chose for our exhibit, and maybe tie together some narrative about those still images, because it's not animation necessarily, they're still images. So can you talk a little bit about what you submitted to our virtual exhibit?
Yeah. The first thing that I did was, I think it's the first slide, but it could be different. It could be different order, I think, for the gallery. But I made a poster like far after the film because it was so much work to just get it done in time to submit it for my thesis. But it's a poster featuring all the characters from the Northeast Kingdom. It's a map board with gouache, which is actually, I did gouache paintings. That's actually the background for the whole film. So they're little gouache paintings. They're probably like that big. They're really small. I realized that if if I made the paintings as small as possible, then it would take me less time
Yeah.
and less paint, and I could paint more than one at a time. One of my favorite artists is Jacob Lawrence, and I don't know if anyone has seen his work before, but really amazing stuff. He did this narrative about African Americans immigrating from the South to the North. Really amazing colors. But I was reading about his process, and he has all these narrative paintings, and he just mixed a color at a time, and he would paint that color across all of the different panels, and then mix the next color and paint it across a bunch more. So that was kind of something that I used like for process for the film. So I don't know, just something, I don't know, that I found that was really helpful to me, like outside of animation, is just hearing about his process, because it's all about narrative, and he had to have the color match because it's like a long narrative that's happening in that. But what else is there for slides? There's I took a class with Janie Geyser at Cal Arts, and some of the slides are from that. I made basically these slides that I just put in front of lights. It was a slideshow of someone getting lost, actually like a map, like you said at the very beginning. And actually that map is a little bit similar to the Northeast Kingdom because I was working on that film at the same time. Like you can see in the movie, the barber is moving into town. That's part of one of the elements for the narrative. But that map is one of the ideas. Like while I was working through the film, I had all these side projects to kind of think about the larger world that I was creating. And that was like, so it's from a different film, but it's related to the Northeast Kingdom. I'm trying to think. And there's another thing that I have in it that's a really long acetate slide that's based on it's actually from a gouache painting, but I had it enlarged. Well, I didn't have it enlarged. I had it printed on acetate as a really long slide because I was thinking about doing a magic lantern show, which actually turned into the Bill Jennings Mysteries, a movie that I made recently. So I don't know. It's just I have all these things that I've been developing as I go. But so it's all elements from that process. I don't know, just by making stuff all the time. Yeah.
And on process, I think we can wrap up our conversation here about process and just talk to our NVU students and to anyone else who is interested in animation about process, the importance of process. And it's not going to look the same for everyone, but speak from your perspective how your process is, first of all, important, what's carried through from when you were a child to now, and how that influences your work.
I think it depends on what the project is, because I've made paintings. That's something that I've been doing, like for a while now. And I've been making comics for recently pretty often. So I have that. So there's different processes for all of that stuff. But when I'm making a film, I usually plan it all on paper. So it depends on what the film is, but sometimes I'll start with just a sketch. So I made a film, my first film at CalArts, Going Through the Motions, is about my experience in gym class, and I wasn't good. I'm not like a good athlete. So it was just things that I remembered growing up. Like the different exercises you had to do, like that box where you had to see how far you could measure. Yeah.
The reach.
Yeah. So that's in the film, but there's a lot of different things. Actually, even when the person throws the baseball, that was like my throwing technique, which is really bad. But so for that film, though, I just started with just sketches, just remembering what it was. And actually, it started out more autobiographical, but then it became more exaggerated as I went. Because I don't know if anyone has seen that, but someone actually does lose their eye in that gym class movie. But it's all just like silly, goofy stuff. But I'm trying to think. So other types of process, other films, like if I've made a documentary, I'll have questions. I'll generate questions that are open-ended so that when I'm asking someone, they're the ones that are providing all the answers. They're giving me all the material. So that's like the process I used for my mass art thesis, Running in Darkness. I had questions, but I wanted it to be all of the material to be told by the interviewees. What else is there? For the Bill Jennings Mysteries, I made a list of things, like things that I remember. And then I kind of whittled it away a little bit. So I started with, it's all handwritten, and then I just kind of slowly chipped away at it until I got it to the exact wording that I wanted. For the Northeast Kingdom, I kind of described that a little bit, but it really just started with drawings, just things that I had, some of those people that I remembered, like the turkey lady or that guy I never met with the antler hat. And there was even, I forget what the name of the town is. I think it's Richmond, Vermont. If you are driving a certain way on the highway, you can see Richmond. I think it's that town. and you can see everything in the town. It's all contained, the town square and everything. There's the church, there's all those buildings, the square. So that's kind of the initial inspiration for that establishing shot too, with Northfield also. So I think it kind of depends, but I always start on paper, and I always start with just drawings because that's just a way of, it helps me remember things. And the other thing too is it's different in your head than when you're drawing it on paper, and it can, I don't know, it's just nice to be open-minded and see what you come up with from just making those drawings, because it could shift a little bit
Yep.
once you make the drawing. But anyway, that's just it's easiest for me to just make all of these drawings, then I can always rearrange them later if I need to. So it's not, the other thing too is it's usually not in the right order. It's like kind of out of order. It's just all of these ideas or scenes, and then I shape it into something later. So I'm just getting my ideas out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a great place to stop, because what I just heard you say is that the creative process is not linear. It is dumping all the ingredients out on the table and then working with them and seeing where they lead you, oftentimes. And so I think that's a great place to stop, because it speaks to what the creative process in general is. And your end product just happens to be animation and cartoons and films. But for other people, it's something totally different. But what you've just captured is what art is. It is about taking all those floating thoughts in your head and getting it out there, manifesting it. And as you said, that process looks different for absolutely everyone, but the process matters. So, Alan, I want to thank you so much for joining me and having this interview, and thank you so much for being the keynote speaker and the guest artist for the NVU Vermont Animation Festival. And on behalf of NVU, Catamoment Arts, and the Vermont Curators Group, I just want to say thank you. This has been extremely interesting conversation, juicy, as I say, and full of great inspiration. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be doing this for Vermont too. So, yeah.
And we are glad to have you. So Alan, we will see you soon, virtually again, but thanks and stay well.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you so much to Alan for joining me, and thank you to Northern Vermont University, Catamoment Arts, and the Vermont Curators Group for making this all possible. Until next time, stay well.
Catamoment Arts would like to thank these sponsors for their continued support.